Let's see. The author of the passage criticizes Salin's essay for its, which means there is some opinion based on somebody else's writing. We can infer that Salin's main goal in writing his essay was to. That means there is something about some writing that a person has to assess. The author mentions Tanzia's Hadza community to illustrate. That means in this writing the person is talking about, there is an example given with a certain purpose. And the author of the passage mentions Galbraith, the Edward Society. So that means there is another person being brought in, another piece of writing being brought in. Now from the questions, I really don't know anything. From the questions, I can't tell what this topic is. So do I want to try it? Or would I really like to try something else which might be easier before I come to this? I'd probably take that call. I mean, right now we'll do it. But if I had looked at this in the exam and I had looked at those 4 questions, I would have said, from those 4 questions, I can't tell you what this passage is going to be. So rather than take the chance on it, I'll try a few of the, let's say, other RC passages I might find doable, or I'll try, let us say, paragraph type questions which I might find doable. Then I'll come back to this. Right? So I would come back to this when I had done other things that I find comfortable, because I'm not able to assess what this thing is about. Now, you might also believe, but I could have probably read the first paragraph. Let me assure you that reading the first paragraph doesn't really help you understand how easy or difficult a piece of writing is going to be for you. See, for you, it comes out of familiarity. For you, what shall we say, the reason that you pick up a passage is actually because you're familiar with the kind of content that you think it has. But from this, I don't know what kind of content it has. From those 4 question statements, I don't know its content. So, in the earlier case, you remember, in the earlier 3 cases, from the question statements, we understood what the content might be and we believed it would be doable. Here, I don't know. So, because I don't know, I'll probably leave this, get down to some other questions, do what is comfortable and then come back to this later. So, in an exam, I would have done that. But having said that, now let's try this one. So, we'll try this passage because we will also then understand if it is tricky in terms of familiarity, then how do I deal with it? So, 50 years after its publication in English in 1972, and just a year since Marshall Sahlins himself died, which means this author died and this author published this book 50 years ago. We may ask, why did his essay, Original Affluent Society, have such an impact? Obviously, that was a very significant essay in terms of its effect that it had. And how has it fared since? That means in the 50 years after that, is it still quite impactful? Salin's principal argument was simple but counterintuitive, which means it was not a complicated argument, but it seemed to run against what we normally understand. Counterintuitive would mean we'd naturally make certain assumptions, but this runs against that. Before being driven into marginal environments by colonial powers, hunter-gatherers or foragers were not engaged in a desperate struggle for meager survival. So, people seem to think that it is with colonization that people actually started to get better lives. And this guy is saying, no, that's not true. Hunter-gatherers or foragers, that means people who actually live very, very primitive lives, were not desperately struggling for a meager survival. Quite the contrary, they satisfied their needs with far less work than people in agricultural and industrial societies, leaving them more time to use as they wished. Hunters equipped keep bankers' hours. That means they get up in the morning, they start work at 10 o'clock and they close at 5. That's what he means by bankers' hours. So, hunters equipped keep bankers' hours. That means they don't work very often or they don't work very long hours. Refusing to maximize, many were more concerned with games of chance than with chances of game. So, he's saying because they did not want to extend the hours and they worked only certain hours or they hunted only during certain hours and seasons, they were more concerned with what do they do in their time. What do they do in their time? You know, you toss stones, you play games with stones, you do all that, rather than chances of game, rather than trying to find, and game here would mean prey. They would mean animals that they want to hunt. So, they would hunt animals only during certain times, certain seasons. The rest of the time, they were free to do whatever they wanted. So, he's just making a joke there, right? But the joke to deliver a serious idea. The serious idea being, it's not as if they were struggling for survival. In fact, they worked a few hours, survived and had time for themselves. So, the so-called Neolithic revolution, which means this whole business of bringing civilization in, rather than improved life, imposed a harsher work regime and set in motion the long history of growing inequality, right? Once you started agriculture, once you started manufacture, then you started inequality, right? And you started people working much longer hours. Moreover, foragers had other options. The contemporary Hadza of Tanzania, who had long been surrounded by farmers, knew that they had alternatives and rejected them. That means these people are hunters, they are foragers. They pick up food wherever they can. And they have been surrounded by farmers, but they have rejected farming. To Salin, this shows that foragers are not simply examples of human diversity or victimhood, but something more profound. That means they choose it, that they choose that way of living. They demonstrated that societies make real choices. That means a current tribe that is a forager is actually rejecting other forms, saying that we prefer to be this. So they make real choices. Culture, a way of living oriented around a distinct set of values, manifests a fundamental principle of collective self-determination, which means collectively this group has determined that this is the way they want to live. And he gives you the example of the forager, current contemporary forager community to show you that. But the point of the essay is not so much that the empirical validity of the data is not so much how do you support what you're saying. The real interest for most readers, after all, is not in foragers either today or in some ancient Paleolithic era, but rather its conceptual challenge to contemporary economic life and bourgeois individualism, which means the real interest is not whether you have foragers, but the real interest is how do certain cultures actually challenge the way we believe economic life and middle class life should run today. The empirical, that means the observation, served as a philosophical and political project, a thought experiment and stimulus to the imaginative possibilities. That means if that is true about let us say categories of or communities or tribes, then just imagine how it is cultures could have developed or what it is that society could develop as. So an imagination of possibilities, right? So with its titles nod towards the affluent society, because he actually called it original affluent society. And that is actually in some sense acknowledging the fact that there was a book called, which used the term, because with its titles nod toward, that means he does acknowledge that Galbraith had a book, The Affluent Society. So with its title nod towards affluent society, Galbraith's famously skeptical portrait of America's post-war prosperity and inequality, and dripping with the new left contempt for consumerism, right? So he is actually acknowledging that Galbraith also had a novel where he said that your belief about capitalism is wrong and your belief about consumerism is wrong. This is what Galbraith said. So now this person calls his book The Original Affluent Society. He brought this critical perspective to bear on the contemporary world. So he took the very same thoughts that Galbraith had, that there is something wrong about just the ideal of capitalism and consumerism, and he's brought it to apply to the contemporary world. Now, in the 1970s, because he wrote this book in 1972, right? So he wrote it 20 years later almost, and he brought the same ideas in. It did so through the classic anthropological move of showing that radical alternatives to the reader's lives really exist. So he actually showed you that, your life doesn't have to be the way it is. It could have been some other way also. If the capitalist world seeks wealth through ever greater material production to meet infinitely expansive desires, foraging societies follow the Zen road to affluence. Zen road is, let's be peaceful, let's be calm. That's what you mean by a Zen road. No, let's approach our goal calmly. Not by getting more, but by wanting less. So the capitalist world wants to get its objectives by gaining more and more and more. Materialist. But the Zen world would actually gain what it wants by wanting less and less and less, and therefore the objective then becomes easier to reach. So and that's what the affluent society pointed at, the excesses of the capitalist world, and the original affluent society saying that is it. People have been wanting things in excess. Why don't we look at foragers and hunters to realize that if you only wanted a simple life, it is much more easy and calming and peaceful. So if the capitalist world seeks wealth through even greater material production to meet infinitely expansive desires, foraging societies follow the Zen road to affluence, not by getting more, but by wanting less. If it seems that foragers have been left behind by progress, which means the author really is saying that what we consider today is not really progress because we've got ourselves into a mess of all different kinds. If it seems that foragers have been left behind by the so-called material progress, this is due only to the ethnocentric self-congratulation of the West. It's only because the West wants to congratulate itself on its achieving things in a capitalist environment. Rather than accumulate material goods, these societies, which society? The foragers and the hunters, rather than accumulate material goods, which is what the West wants, The foragers and hunters, these societies are guided by other values, leisure, mobility, and above all, freedom. Freedom from want, freedom from material want, freedom from desire, freedom from, and the acceptance of what actually keeps them, gives them time, gives them mobility, and freedom to be themselves. So that is it. In other words, while Galbraith's work is mentioned to talk about the fact that he pointed out what the ills of capitalism were, this man in Original Affluent Society says it's not just that capitalism has ills. We have dismissed all other forms of life where hunter-gatherers who of non-material kind of societies, believing that they haven't actually kept up with progress. But the truth really is that maybe they've chosen that because it gives them leisure, it gives them mobility, it gives them freedom. Okay, so that is what we're looking at over here. So viewed in today's context, of course, not every aspect of the essay has aged well. That means now the author is saying what that person says has not always been accepted. When you say not every aspect has aged well, it means that some of it is not accepted. While acknowledging the violence of colonialism, racism, and dispossession, it does not thematize them as heavily as we might today. That means while the book does actually talk about the negatives of this, it doesn't focus so much on those negatives as much as we do today. Rebuking evolutionary anthropologists for treating present-day foragers as left behind by progress, right? So while criticizing anthropologists for saying that foragers are actually primitive, it too can succumb to the temptation to use them as proxies for the Paleolithic. That means it can sometimes say that this is a proxy for what the world should have been like. Yet these characteristics should not distract us from appreciating Salin's effort. That means while there are downsides, it's still something that is worthy of looking at, is worthy of our attention. It should not distract us from appreciating his effort to show that if we want to conjure new possibilities, we need to learn about actually inhabitable worlds. That means if you really want to look at new possibilities, you need to know about worlds that we consider inhabitable and how do people actually inhabit them. So if we really consider inhabitable worlds and how people cope with them, then we can conjure new possibilities, and Salin's essay helps us see that. Okay. So the author of the passage criticizes Salin's essay for its what? Down towards the end, no? Over here. The only criticism he has is here. Does not age well. Why? Because it does not focus as heavily as it should on certain things, and it does actually treat this as some kind of proxy. So that is his criticism. So cursory treatment of the effects of racism and colonialism, quite right. He doesn't give it much attention. So we know that he criticizes it because it doesn't pay as much attention as it should on racism and colonialism. That's there. Outdated values regarding present-day foragers versus ancient foraging societies? No. He's saying present-day foragers and ancient foraging communities have the same kind of value system. So he's not saying that they're outdated values. So this is not what we're looking at. Failure to supplement its thesis with robust empirical data? No, he says he does give you empirical data. He does. He gives you empirical data. He actually says here that not so much the empirical validity. So he does give you empirical validity. But that is not the exciting thing. The exciting thing is the possibilities that it holds. So he does give you empirical data. So he says failure to supplement? No, we are not accepting that. There's no failure there. Critique of anthropologists who disparage the choices of foragers in today's society. Now, is he criticizing it because, no, he says actually, if you do actually rebuke anthropologists, you're in some sense making a small mistake yourself. So he's not in some sense criticizing Salin. Now, when he says the critique of anthropologists who disparage the choices of foragers in today's society, he's saying maybe anthropologists do. Maybe the anthropologists treat present-day foragers being left behind. But is he critiquing that? He's only critiquing it. He's not criticizing them. He's saying that yes, you might say they've been left behind, but they also are proxies for that. In other words, he's saying that considering them as foragers, you might actually say they're left behind, but you must recognize that they're also being proxies. So he's running a critique that is not the same as a criticism. A critique is an analysis, but he criticizes the essay for saying that you actually have not paid enough attention. Salin has not paid enough attention or as severe attention as he should to racism and colonialism. So 1 is the answer to 13. And then 14, we can infer that Salin's main goal in writing his essay was to do what? To tell you that there are certain lifestyles which if we study, we realize can actually be alternatives. And if we know those alternatives, then we can actually build we can imagine ourselves in certain situations where we can build lifestyles for ourselves. So we can infer that Salin's main goal in writing his essay was to do what? Was to put forth the view that despite egalitarian origins, economic progress brings greater inequality and social hierarchies. Now he says economic progress brings inequality, fine, social hierarchies, fine. Does he say that it started egalitarian? Does he tell us that it started egalitarian? And is that the very purpose of his essay? He mentions the fact that it brings in equality. He doesn't say that he started equally, but it's not even the main goal. The main goal is to present to us the possibilities that exist when we learn how it is that primitive societies actually were quite happy and worked effectively enough. So it can't be one. To counter Galbraith's pessimistic view of the inevitability of capitalist trajectory, not to counter it. In fact, he takes it forward. So he's not countering it at all. Highlight the fact that while we started off as a fairly contented egalitarian people, we have progressively degenerated to materialism. He does say that, but is that his main goal? His main goal is to tell you that it is possible to be primitive. Primitive not in that sense. Primitive as in non-capitalist, non-materialist. It is possible to actually have simple lives because there are people who have done it. So is it to hold a mirror to an acquisitive society to tell you this is where you're going wrong? Because when you hold a mirror to someone, you're saying, see what you like, see what's wrong with you. With examples of other communities that have chosen successfully to be non-materialistic. So he says the foragers actually had built good lives for themselves. Compare that with yourselves, and you have digressed into materialism, consumerism, inequality. But compare yourselves. Now understand yourselves. Hold a mirror, which means look at yourselves. Understand where you are. And recognize that you can possibly draw inspiration from people who are not like you. So that is his goal actually. So 4 then is the answer to this question. And if we move forward to 15, the author mentions Tanzania's Hadza community to illustrate that even today there are some communities somewhere in the world who've chosen a certain simple way of life, even though they've been surrounded with people who have progressed into different lifestyles. So is it to illustrate how pre-agrarian societies did not hamper the emergence of more advanced agrarian practices? No. Is it that forager communities' lifestyles derived not from ignorance but from their own choice? Exactly. That means we know that you guys have this possibility, but we choose not to accept it. We choose to be the way we are. Not because they were ignorant, but because they made their own choices. So he does give you the example for that reason. That is, they have picked this, though they see agriculture all around them. So they don't know, it's not that they don't know there's an alternative. They know there's an alternative, but they choose to live the way they do. So they picked it not from ignorance, but from their own choice. Fine. That hunter-gatherer community subsistence level techniques equip them to survive well into contemporary times. But the point is, he's saying, though surrounded by agriculture, they have chosen to continue with foraging, which means 2 is a better answer than 3. How 2 vastly different ways of living and working were able to coexist in proximity? That's not the reason. He's not saying, see, you can have different lifestyles living side by side. That was not the purpose of the illustration. If you want to go back to it, you can see that there. He says, over here, he says, if you were to look at the Hadza community, they had long been surrounded by farmers. They knew they had alternatives, but they rejected them, which is they demonstrated that societies can make real choices. Therefore, the answer to this would actually be 2. Okay. Coming down to 16. The author of the passage mentions Galbraith's affluent society to what? To show you that Salin's views, in some sense, took forward Galbraith's views. Galbraith actually criticized the contemporary materialistic society, and Salin took that forward and said, he stayed with it and said, let's learn that a non-materialist society can exist. So, to show how Salin's views complemented, that means ran parallel with or utilized or expanded on Galbraith's criticism of consumerism and inequality of contemporary society, possibly. Let's just hold that there. To document the influence of Galbraith's cynical views on modern consumerism, to document the influence of Galbraith's views. No, he took Galbraith's views and said these views are actually correct. So, to document the influence of his cynical views on Salin's analysis of prehistoric societies, no. It is his analysis of there is a lifestyle that we can choose as a choice. That means we don't have to be consumerist. We can also have a non-consumerist choice. So it's not to document the influence of Galbraith's views. To show how Galbraith's theories refute Salin's thesis, no, Salin is taking Galbraith's theories and accepting them and is taking them forward. So it's not about refutation. So that is not the case. And contrast the materialist nature of contemporary growth paths with the pacifist content ways of living among foragers. No, it's not the pacifist content ways of living among foragers. It's the pacifist content of foragers, not of living among. Right? It's not that. It is the specific content that the foragers have. So he's not talking about the, let us say, the materialistic nature of contemporary growth paths and the pacifist nature of foragers. That is what Salins himself is saying. But why did he bring Galbraith up? Why did he bring Galbraith up? To show you, I mean, the author mentions Galbraith to show you that Salin took Galbraith's views forward in criticizing consumerism and saying that there is an alternative possibility. So 1 is the answer to 16. So that finishes the RC passages. We now get down to the other kinds of questions, the kind that look at paragraphs. Okay, so as you can see from the directions here, this is the kind of question where you have a paragraph which has blanks and you have a statement given to you at the head of the whole thing, which you have to read, understand and fit into one of those blanks so that the paragraph makes the best possible sense. So and how do you do it? You just keep track of what the paragraph is trying to say, recognize the relevance of the given sentence in the context and put it in the best place in the context. Okay, so what's the given sentence? The discovery. And the moment you say the discovery, you have to say which discovery. So we know that we are going to put it in a blank after a certain discovery is mentioned to us. Fine. So the discovery helps to explain archaeological similarities between the Paleolithic peoples of China, Japan and the Americas. So what discovery are we talking about? It has to come after that. Anyway, let's look at the paragraph. The researchers also uncovered an unexpected genetic link. So there's a discovery right there, right? Between Native Americans and Japanese people. All right. But if you say the discovery helps to explain, then could it work in 1? Let's look at that. But we'll read the rest. The researchers also uncovered an unexpected genetic link between Native Americans and Japanese people. During the deglaciation period, another group branched out from northern coastal China and traveled to Japan. So there was an unexpected link between Native American and Japanese people. There was also a link that you found during the deglaciation period about those from coastal China to Japan. And then we were surprised to find this ancestral source also contribute to the Japanese gene pool, especially the indigenous Inus, says Lee. We were surprised to find that this ancestral pool, so one thing, we've got here, you got Native American and Japanese people, you've got China and Japanese, you've got Japanese gene pool, which means some connection between China and Japan and then between Japan and Native Americans. You're talking about an entire, that means there's a discovery of an entire gene network over here. We were surprised to find that this ancestral source also contributed to the Japanese gene pool, especially the indigenous Inus as in a tribe. So what we are saying is that this was also a discovery. So that means discoveries have happened here, here and here up to this point. So am I going to say this discovery helps to explain? Now helps explain archaeological similarities between China, Japan and the Americas. So what then tells you that there's a whole gene network. The whole gene network will explain something. So does the explanation of China, Japan and the Americas, does China get explained in 1? No. Does China get explained in 2? Yes. But China, Japan and the Americas is discussed here. So that means it has to be a totality. But then we were surprised to find this answer. That means China and Japan is expressed over here. So the discovery has taken all of this. The discovery of the genetic network has taken all of this. So would it make sense in 3? Possibly, because that genetic network helps us understand let's say the connection or archaeological similarities between these people. But let's not get fixed on that. They shared similarities in how they crafted stemmed projectile points for arrowheads and spears. So now, what are those archaeological similarities? So you say it helps explain archaeological similarities. If I put that here, then this tells me what those archaeological similarities are. Their weapons for that, for instance, okay, or going forward, This suggests that the Pleistocene connection, that means your prehistoric connection, among the Americas, China and Japan was not confined to culture but also to genetics, says senior author so and so, so and so. Now, if you're going to say the discovery helps explain archaeological similarities, and you have a statement telling me where those similarities are, then you introduce the similarities and tell me what the similarities are. But what helps explain the similarities is the entire network that we've unearthed, right? So they've unearthed the network of things. First, we are told about the link between Americans and the Native Americans, or what we used to call Red Indians, and the Japanese people. It also tells me about the link between the Chinese and the Japanese people. It therefore says now we understand that this is a gene pool that the Chinese also contribute to. So now that we understand that there's a whole gene pool that actually connects these three, who? The Native Americans, the Japanese and the Chinese. Now we understand how it is that you actually have similarities, archaeological similarities in all these areas. So it's actually best in three. Then the archaeological similarities are given to you as an example in, let's say, their weapons as such. So I would not place it in 4. Between 1, 2 and 3, it's best in 3, but I would not place it in 4 because I've already finished discussing the similarities. So I'm not going to say, look at their weapons, they are similar, and then tell you there are similarities. I'll say there are similarities, look at their weapons, they are similar. And how do they arrive at the similarities? Because they have a common gene pool. Fine. So 3 is the best place for it. So option 3. That means it needs to go into option 3. Oh, sorry, into space 3. So what is that then? So here it needs to go into space 3. So the answer really would be space 3. And if it is space 3, then it goes into 1. All right. So option 3 is going to be your answer over here. Okay. What about the other one? If I were to look at this philosophical cut at one's core beliefs, values and way of life is difficult enough. Now, this philosophical cut, that means that stroke, that impact, that blow. So, philosophical cut at one's core belief, that means there is something that impacts on your core beliefs, your values and your way of life is difficult enough. That means you're talking about something may be difficult, but this one is difficult enough. Okay, I've got that. Now, what does the paragraph tell me? The experience of reading philosophy is often disquieting. That means we actually find it unsettling. When reading philosophy, the values around which one has heretofore organized one's life may come to look provincial, flatly wrong, or even evil. That means when you're reading philosophy, the values around which we have organized ourselves may come to seem wrong. And that is therefore that philosophy sometimes tells us that our beliefs are wrong. That's what the sentence says, no? Philosophy sometimes tells us that our beliefs are wrong and we find it difficult to deal with that. Right? It's difficult enough. So can it work in 1? Perhaps. But let's keep it there and follow. When beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible, new beliefs, values and way of living may be required. So once people question your beliefs, you might actually want new beliefs. So if you say new beliefs, values and way of living may be required, then that does not contribute to a philosophical cut. You're going to require new values because your philosophy has been questioned. You're not going to say you've got new values and then question your philosophy. So it's probably not going to work in 2. So this is probably not the place we're looking at. Then if you go forward, right, what's worse? Philosophers admonish each other to remain unsutured until such time as a defensible new answer is revealed. The paragraph continues though with what's worse, and then you start thinking what's worse, which means you have to tell me, when you're going to say what's worse, you have to tell me that something is bad. So what's worse? Philosophers admonish each other. Now, what about this is bad? So if I had put it in 1, let's say, the experience of reading philosophy is often disquieting. When reading philosophy, the values around which one has heretofore organized one's life may come to look provincial, flatly wrong or even evil. Now, this philosophical cut at one's core beliefs, values and way of life is difficult enough. Now, when you say it's difficult enough, that connects to what's worse. So, can it come in 2? I did not initially think about 2 because I believe that the cut is actually what is happening. The questioning is the cut. And the questioning is the cut that we might refer to here. And then, having had that cut, we might look for new beliefs. When beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible, new beliefs, values and ways of life may be required. right? Now, if we are getting new beliefs and values in the way of life, why would I say something is worse than that? We are already doing something good. So the point is, the whole thing together is what happens when my beliefs are cut. The whole thing together is what happens when my beliefs are cut. That means my beliefs are questioned. I have to find new ways of thinking. Now that is bad enough. That way of life is bad enough. What's worse? So that means it is quite possible that 2 works. So what's worse? Philosophers admonish each other to remain unsutured, that means don't connect yourself to other things, until such time as a defensible new answer is revealed or constructed. That means philosophers are saying, even if you question your philosophies, and don't disconnect from them until you find something else that is justifiable. So sometimes, so that means you're in a state of confusion then. So that means you're already confused. If you follow the thread here, you're already confused. You have to find a new way. And while that seems bad enough, if I put it in 2, while that seems bad enough, what is worse, people are saying, don't abandon your old ways until you actually find a new way. That means I'm in total state of confusion. So sometimes philosophical writing is even strictly critical in that it does not even attempt to provide an alternative after tearing down a cultural concept or a conceptual citadel. Now, then I'm not going to say what's worse, because I'm already talking about the fact that this is severe. You realize this is extreme. Philosophy does not sometimes even offer you an alternative. So already you have a problem. You have to find an alternative, and that is a problem enough. You have to find an alternative, and that's problem enough. What's worse is that sometimes philosophy says there doesn't even offer you an alternative. So it's bad enough that I have to look for an alternative because philosophy caused me to do it. It's even worse because philosophy doesn't even help me find an alternative. So it does make a lot of sense in 2. Okay. So let's just keep that there for a moment. Now, it's not going to make sense in 3, because saying that it's bad enough, only then you can connect to what's worse. So now I'm not going to say what's worse than what. If I didn't put it in 2, then what is worse than what? I'm already talking about something that's bad. So this way of life being difficult is bad, and what's worse is this. So it's still better in 2 than it's in 3. It won't come in 3. The reader of philosophy must be prepared for the possibility of this experience. While reading philosophy can help clarify one's values and even make one self-conscious for the first time of the fact that there are good reasons for believing what one believes, it can also generate unremediated doubt that is difficult to live with, which means we are saying that philosophy can help you clarify your views, but can also generate doubt that you might find difficult to live with. What is the doubt? They've caused me to question myself, but they haven't given me a solution to it, which means this continues. You really wouldn't want to put in 3. And there's no point putting in 4, because you're saying 4 says the philosophical cut is difficult enough. Then you have to follow it with what's more difficult than that. This is difficult enough, but there's something worse coming. So it can't be in 4, right? It can't be in 4. It can't be in 3 because you're not telling me about something worse coming. What's worse that's coming is this. What's worse that's coming is they don't even help me deal with my problem. So 2 is actually the best place for this sentence. So it will actually be option 2. All right, which is your blank 2.